I wasn't sure why I signed up for the night shift that November. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the excitement of being a rookie cop. Either way, it was a decision I'd come to regret. The night started out normal enough. A quiet shift in a quiet town. Nothing ever happened here, or so they said. It was just after midnight when the call came in. A noise complaint. An abandoned house, the dispatcher said, on the edge of town. I glanced at my partner, Sarah Daniels. She was new too, fresh out of the academy like me. We exchanged a look, half excitement, half dread, and headed out. The house stood on the outskirts, a hulking Victorian thing, draped in fog and years of neglect. Everyone in town knew the place. The locals whispered about it, claimed it was cursed. But we didn't believe in curses. Not yet. When we arrived, the place loomed over us like a dark figure in the night. It was unsettling, but we had a job to do. As we approached, I noticed the front door was slightly open, moving just enough to creak in the cold wind. Sarah and I stood there for a moment, listening, waiting. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered. I strained to listen. At first it was just the wind, but then I heard it too. Low murmurs like voices, muffled but distinct. Footsteps, maybe? My stomach tightened. I wasn't one to scare easily, but there was something about that house. I drew my flashlight and service weapon, stepping closer. "Police, identify yourself," I called out. No response. Just silence, thick and heavy, like the air itself was holding its breath. We pushed the door open and stepped inside. The smell hit us first. Decay, mold, and something else, something I couldn't quite place. The house was a relic, covered in dust and cobwebs, as if no one had set foot inside for decades. But those noises, they didn't belong to an empty house. We moved through the rooms, calling out, but there was nothing. Only the creak of old floorboards beneath our boots and the sound of our own breathing. It was colder inside than it was outside, which didn't make any sense. My breath came out in frosty clouds, and every instinct screamed at me to leave. But we had a job to do. In the living room we found a shattered window. That must have been the source of the noise, I thought, relieved for a moment. Probably vandals. But then I saw it. A small, worn teddy bear lying on the floor beneath the broken glass. It wasn't covered in dust like everything else. It looked recent. I bent down, picking it up gingerly. This house was supposed to be abandoned, right? Sarah nodded, but her eyes were glued to the bear. There was something wrong about it, something I couldn't explain. I wanted to toss it away, to leave. But just as I turned to speak, a scream tore through the silence. It was sharp, piercing, and it came from upstairs. My heart raced. I locked eyes with Sarah. Her face was pale, but we didn't have a choice. We had to check it out. We climbed the stairs, each step a groan of protest under our weight. The sound seemed to grow louder, echoing in my head. The scream had come from the master bedroom. We stopped outside the door, and I hesitated for just a second before pushing it open. What I saw inside still haunts me. Sergeant Miller stood in the center of the room. I hadn't even realized he was there, hadn't heard him come in. His face was ashen, his eyes wide, staring straight ahead like he was frozen. He didn't move, didn't speak. "Sergeant," my voice was barely a whisper. "Are you okay?" Miller didn't respond. He just kept staring past us, at something in the room. I followed his gaze, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. My skin prickled, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. "Sergeant, what did you see?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. It took him a moment, but when he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, shaky. "There was a woman," he said. "She was standing right there." I frowned. "What woman?" Miller swallowed hard. She had long black hair. Her eyes... He stopped, his voice breaking. Her eyes were black, all black. My heart hammered in my chest. Sarah and I exchanged a glance, and I could tell she was feeling the same cold dread I was. But there was no one there. We searched the rest of the house, moving as quickly as we could, but there was nothing, no one. The air felt thick with something I couldn't explain, something that made my skin crawl. The house was mocking us, playing with us, and the worst part was, I didn't know what it wanted. By the time we left, the wind had picked up, swirling around the house like it was trying to keep us there. Miller didn't say another word. He just walked to his car, got in, and drove away without looking back. The official report listed the incident as a break-in, attributing the shattered window to vandals. But I knew better. We all did. Something was wrong with that house, something that defied reason, something that left a stain on my soul. For weeks after, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that room, heard that scream, and felt the weight of whatever had been watching us that night. I don't know what it was, but it was real, and I'll never forget it. Some nights, when the wind howls just right, I can still hear that house calling me back. But I'll never go back. The neon lights of Las Vegas bled into the darkness as I cruised down the Strip, my patrol car weaving through the noise of a city that never sleeps. 5 years on the force, and nothing ever felt quite as lonely as the graveyard shift. The night was thick with the usual chaos, drunks spilling out of bars, couples staggering down sidewalks, laughter rising in bursts. It was the city, alive as always. Yet, something about that night was different. It was July, sweltering, the air heavy with the stench of exhaust, sweat, and cheap perfume. I rolled down the windows, letting the warm wind whip through the car. My AC was struggling, and I didn't have the energy to mess with it. The night had been slow, a few public intoxication cases, some noise complaints, routine stuff. I wasn't expecting anything to break the monotony. Then, as I turned onto a deserted side street, it hit me. A chill. Out of nowhere, the temperature inside the car dropped so fast that my breath fogged the windshield. The AC wasn't just acting up. It felt like someone had cranked it to sub-zero. I rubbed the back of my neck, suddenly aware of how cold it felt. For a second, I swore I felt breath, a cold, icy breath, right on my skin. But that couldn't be right. No one was there. I dismissed it, tried to shake off the unease gnawing at my gut. I was just tired, I told myself. These late shifts can mess with your head. The quiet didn't help either. Vegas was never this quiet, and the silence felt unnatural, too heavy. That's when I saw her. She was standing on the sidewalk, perfectly still. A woman, dressed in white, her back to me. Her long dark hair cascaded down her back, nearly blending into the night. It was strange. No one just stands there, alone. Especially not on a night like this. Something about her felt wrong, out of place. I slowed the car to a stop, my headlights casting long shadows down the street. I rolled down the window. "Ma'am, you okay?" No response. She didn't move, didn't even flinch. I hesitated, then climbed out of the car. My hand hovered over my holster just in case. "Ma'am, do you need assistance?" I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. I approached slowly, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The closer I got, the more I realized how wrong this all felt. Her dress, it was old-fashioned, intricate lace lining the sleeves and hem. And her stillness, it wasn't right. Not natural, like she wasn't even breathing. I was a few feet away when my eyes flicked to the shop window behind her, and my heart stopped. She had no reflection, My pulse spiked. I blinked hard, tried to rationalize it, but there was no explaining what I was seeing. The window reflected everything. Cars, streetlights, even me. But not her. I took a step back, dread crawling up my spine. My hand shook as I reached for my radio, unsure of what to say. Hell, what do you even report in a situation like this? Before I could speak into the radio, the streetlights flickered and went out. Everything plunged into darkness. My breath caught in my throat. And then, the sound. A low, guttural growl echoed from behind me. I froze. The sound wasn't human. Slowly I turned back toward the patrol car, my hand instinctively dropping to my gun. There, sitting in the driver's seat, were two glowing red eyes. They weren't reflections. They were real, staring at me from inside the car I'd just stepped out of. I drew my weapon, my heart slamming against my ribcage. The growl grew louder, more menacing. I stepped back, gun raised, but my legs felt like lead. Those eyes, they weren't just watching me. They were studying me, like a predator sizing up its prey. I couldn't breathe. Suddenly the car engine roared to life on its own. The patrol car, my patrol car, revved and lurched forward, the headlights flickering wildly. I stumbled backward, barely keeping my footing. The tires screeched as it moved toward me, slow but deliberate, like it was alive, like it had a mind of its own. I fired a shot, but the bullet did nothing. The car kept coming, and the eyes, they never wavered, never blinked, locked onto me with an intensity that chilled me to the core. Panic surged through me. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I turned and ran. My boots pounded against the pavement as I sprinted down the street, the car's engine howling behind me. I didn't dare look back. I could feel the cold air following me, the breath of whatever was in that car. I don't know how long I ran. Minutes, hours. Time lost all meaning. Finally, the sound of the car's engine faded, the growl gone, and I collapsed in an alleyway, gasping for breath. My heart was still racing, adrenaline flooding my veins. When I finally worked up the nerve to look back, the street was empty. The car was gone. No sign of the woman, no sign of anything. Just silence. I staggered back to the precinct, shaken, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But how could I? None of it made sense. Cars don't just move on their own. Women don't disappear without a trace. And no one, has glowing red eyes. That night haunted me for weeks. I couldn't get those eyes out of my head. I reported the incident, but the higher-ups dismissed it as stress, exhaustion. They didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either if I hadn't seen it myself. But I know what I saw, and I'll never forget that feeling. Being watched, hunted by something that wasn't of this world. Even now I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting, and I'll never know when it might come back for me. I've always known that rural Montana has its secrets, but nothing could prepare me for the night I received that call. My name is Jake Brody, a sheriff's deputy, and that night would change everything I thought I understood about fear, reality, and the thin veil between life and death. It was just after 3 a.m. when my radio crackled to life, piercing the silence that enveloped the back roads like a heavy blanket. I answered the call, my voice steady but my heart racing. 911, what's your emergency? The voice on the other end sent chills down my spine. Please, help me. They're trying to kill me. They're everywhere. A woman's voice, high-pitched and laced with terror, each word dripping with desperation. I could hear her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Ma'am, calm down. Can you tell me where you are? I asked, trying to keep her focused, though my own nerves threatened to overtake me. I don't know. It's dark. I can't see. Please, hurry. Her voice weakened, fading into static, as if she were being pulled away from me. "Ma'am, stay with me. We're sending someone to your location. Can you see any landmarks?" But just like that, the line went dead, leaving me with a heavy silence that pressed against my chest. My instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. I quickly traced the call, but it was untraceable, as if it had come from nowhere. I alerted dispatch, my gut twisting with dread. Something inside me knew I had to act fast. I jumped into my cruiser, the engine roaring to life, and sped into the darkness, the headlights slicing through the night like a knife. As I drove deeper into the wilderness, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist around me, a suffocating embrace. I followed the only lead I had, the faint echo of her voice, desperate and scared. Minutes turned into hours, the darkness swallowing me whole, and just as I began to lose hope, I saw it, a glimmer of light breaking through the trees. A dirt road, barely visible through the tall grass, wound off into the dense grove. Something compelled me to turn onto it, a gut feeling that wouldn't let me ignore the pull of the unknown. The road was rough, each bump jarring me, but I pressed on, the weight of my duty heavy on my shoulders. Then out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of something that made my blood run cold. A car, its headlights smashed, its hood crumpled, resting against a towering oak tree, as if it had been there for years. I slammed on the brakes, sending dirt flying, and jumped out, heart pounding. "Hello, Sheriff's Department. Is anyone hurt?" My voice echoed in the stillness, swallowed by the eerie quiet surrounding me. I approached the wrecked car cautiously, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I illuminated the scene. The driver's side door was ajar, but no sign of the driver remained, as if they had vanished into thin air. My heart raced as I moved to the passenger side. I found her, a young woman, lifeless and pale, her eyes staring blankly into the void. In her hand, she clutched a cell phone, the lifeline that had failed her. It had to be the phone from the 911 call, the very call that had led me here. But who had made the call, and where were they now? The questions swirled in my mind like a tempest. I searched the surrounding woods, my flashlight beam cutting through the undergrowth. "Is anyone here?" I shouted, hoping against hope for a response. But only the rustling leaves answered me, as if the forest itself were mocking my desperation. No footprints, no tire tracks, no sign of anyone else ever having been there. It was as if the earth had opened up and swallowed them whole. Panic set in. I called for backup, my voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside me. Hours passed, and my colleagues arrived, combing the woods with flashlights and determination. But we found nothing. No trace of the missing driver, no explanation for the phantom 911 call. Only the chilling silence hung over us, deepening the mystery with every passing minute. The haunting reality of that night began to settle over me, the weight of unanswered questions pressing down like a fog. It was not just a case. It had morphed into a nightmare. As dawn approached, painting the sky with muted hues, I felt a sense of foreboding. What if the woman hadn't just vanished? What if something sinister lurked in those woods, watching and waiting? I returned to my cruiser, the unease gnawing at me. The sun was rising, but the shadows felt deeper, darker. I reviewed the call details, searching for any clues. Nothing made sense. The call had originated from nowhere. I was about to call it in when my phone buzzed, an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered, "Hello? Help me." The voice was weak, a whisper carried on the wind. My heart raced as I recognized it. Her voice, "Where are you?" I demanded, adrenaline surging through me. "They're coming. You have to hurry." The line went dead again. Panic ignited within me. I jumped back into my cruiser, the engine roaring to life as I raced back down the dirt road. Every instinct screamed at me to find her, to uncover the truth hidden in the shadows. I followed the sound of her voice, the echoes drawing me deeper into the woods. But with each turn, the trees seemed to close in, the path growing narrower. I parked and stepped out, the air thick with dread. "Where are you?" I called, my voice trembling. Then I saw it, a flicker of movement just beyond the trees. I pushed through the underbrush, my heart pounding. "I'm coming," I shouted, desperation in every word. As I stepped into a clearing, I froze. There she was, standing alone, her back to me. "You're safe now," I breathed, relief washing over me. But then I noticed something. Her skin was pale, her hair disheveled, and her clothes were tattered, as if she had been running for days. "Help me," she whispered again, her voice barely above a breath. "Where are they?" I asked, scanning the shadows, fear gripping me. Suddenly her head snapped around, and I staggered back in horror. Her eyes were black voids, empty and hollow. "They're coming for you, too," she rasped, her voice echoing in the stillness. The world around me seemed to shift, and the trees began to close in, shadows coiling around me. I turned to run, but the ground beneath me shifted, turning to quicksand. My heart pounded in my chest as I sank deeper. The whispers surrounded me, the air heavy with dread. "Help me," I heard, but it was no longer her voice. It was a chorus of the lost, echoing through the trees, dragging me into their depths. As the darkness swallowed me whole, I realized the truth. I had stepped into a nightmare far worse than I could have ever imagined. There was no escape from the phantom 911 call, no resolution, only the chilling grasp of the unknown. In the end, I was just another lost soul, trapped in the forest, answering a call that should have never been made. The silence returned, thick and suffocating, as if the night itself had claimed me. And deep within the shadows, I could hear the whispers growing louder, calling out for help, forever echoing in the darkness.